All right. Good afternoon, officially, everybody. My name is Dr. Hart. I'm the Senior Design Coordinator. I'm also a professor at ME. I think I've had many of you in class before. So thanks for coming and attending today's talk. This is the first talk of two that we'll have in the spring related to senior design for the upcoming fall. In this first talk, we're going to talk about kind of what to expect for senior design, a little bit of the overview, things like that. And in the second talk, I will have collected all of the project ideas for you, and I will present all of the projects that you could possibly work on. That talk's probably going to happen sometime in early to mid-April. And then after that second talk, we'll have a form for you to fill out to provide your preferences, talk about people you might want to work with, and those sorts of things. Okay, so look for some details about that talk coming up a little bit later. I'll probably send an email about that talk maybe at the end of March or so. Before I get into the talk today, I do want to make mention of one other thing we have going on, and that is Dr. Mahinfla is on the call with us as well. And after I present here today on the Capstone design process, he's going to take maybe 5 or 10 minutes to describe a series of graduate certificate programs that the ME department is going to be offering, which you are going to be eligible for, probably, most of you. And that's something new that we've just started in the department. So after we've gone through this presentation and had some Q&A at the very end, hang on for a couple more minutes and Dr. Mahinfla will take over and kind of describe those processes. Okay. So without further ado, I'm going to share my screen here and talk about the Capstone process. I will send these slides out after this is over so that you can review them. And also I'm recording this now, so if you want to watch this again later, you can feel free to do that. Okay. So I'm going to share my screen here and we'll get right into it. Okay, so you should all be able to see the slide deck now, so we'll just go ahead. First off, what is senior design? I think most people have a general understanding of what this is, but it's a year-long, two-semester back-to-back sequence that you take, where you're kind of going through a year-long project of some sort. There's a lot of different types of projects. We'll talk about that in just a second, but you will sign up for and take MEC 4901 in the fall and MEC 4902 in the spring. These are both 4-credit classes, like 4-credit FOR. They're 3 credits each. All right. You're going to work as a member of a team. Teams are between 3 and 8. Most are going to be about 4 or 5, I would guess. And each of those teams is going to be guided by a faculty advisor. Not necessarily me, though I do advise some projects usually as well. Some example projects that we've had from this last year, which is the 24-25 academic year. We've had fixture testing tooling for Milwaukee Tool, unmanned aerial vehicles for the design build fly competition, carbon fiber truss for mounting an aircraft engine, 3D printed submarines. So there's kind of a wide range of projects depending on what your interest is. If you're into like thermodynamics, heat transfer, maybe you want one type of project. If you're into mechanisms and mechanics, maybe you want a different type of project. And when it comes to filling out your preferences, you can indicate which projects are more preferable to you as the time comes along. All right. How does this generally look? What are the roles and responsibilities of the individuals? So I am the senior design coordinator, meaning I kind of overlook all of the individual projects. But as a student, you're going to be part of a team that is advised by an individual ME faculty advisor. So what are the roles of each of these people? Well, as the coordinator, I sort of organize the syllabi. We're going to have seminars in the fall semester. I'll talk about those a little bit more in just a second. But I organize the seminars. I do all the matching of the projects and the students and the advisors. That's going to happen in late April this spring. I manage the written reports. I organize the oral presentations, which you'll have as you go through the process. I resolve some conflicts that happen. Sadly, there happens to be conflicts, usually 1 or 2 a year that I need to step in and resolve. And then also I ensure proper assessment, which for you guys is not as important, for the advisors is more important. Your advisor is going to be an ME faculty. It's someone that guides your project. They're going to maybe make some homework assignments for you or something like that because they're ultimately the ones responsible for your grade. So each individual advisor is going to give you your grade for the class. They're probably going to meet with you weekly, maybe more than that sometimes. And if you have a customer for your project, an industry sponsor, they're probably going to help coordinate some of those meetings with the industry sponsor. Your responsibility as a student is to go through the design process, which is defining a problem, defining objectives, constraints, doing background research, creating an original design, fabricating a prototype, testing the prototype, and then presenting all that at the very end, right? So that's your role as a student. There are some requirements for taking senior design in the fall. So if you're kind of questioning whether or not maybe you're eligible, this is something that can help guide that. Most of you are going through a 4-year process that looks a bit like this. Maybe you're a little off track, but those that are going to be seniors in the fall, you guys probably started on the quarter system, so your flow chart probably looks something like this. But in general, we would like to have you have senior standing and have completed 2 out of the 4 core junior tracks. And what we mean by the core tracks are dynamics and controls, mechanics, energy, and materials. Dynamics and controls would be things like instrumentation and measurements, dynamic systems. Mechanics are design of machine components, mechanics and materials. Energy is heat transfer fluids, thermodynamics, those sorts of things. And then materials would be the manufacturing processes course and the material science courses. So hopefully you have completed 2 of those 4 tracks. It's not officially on the registrar books that you have to complete 2 of those 4, so you're not going to be removed if you haven't done that. But we're pushing to have that requirement in place in the future. So that's that. How do we do team projects and selections? I'm collecting project ideas as we speak. I have a lot of them already, about 15, and they're continuing to come in by the day. Usually I'll have about 40 or 45 projects that I present, and then we make usually about 30 teams. So there will be more projects presented to you than we actually make. And I think that's actually kind of a good thing because that means better project matching in general between what you guys have interested in and what projects we have available. So that's that. The projects generally come in from local industry sponsors. We have people like Milwaukee Tool, all sorts of people in the Milwaukee area. Okay, I don't want to name all of them, but okay. Professors also provide project ideas. Most of those come in the form of like competition teams. So like super mileage team or design build fly competition or ASME design competition. Those would be some of those. There's also like personal interest from some of the professors. Like Patterson always does like a 3D printed project or a couple 3D printed projects. So students tend to like those. But also you have an ability to propose a project if you'd like. We'll have a bit more detail about what that looks like at the end of this talk. Okay. Once I collect all those project ideas, we'll have another meeting later in the spring term, like I said, right around mid-April. I'll present them all to you. You'll give me feedback on which ones you're interested in, and we'll try to match you as best as you can. You're not guaranteed to work with who you want to work with. You're not guaranteed to work on what you want to work on. I do my best. I have a bit of an algorithm. It usually turns out very well. Okay, so I'll say that. What does the progression look like for the 2 classes? In the fall, you're really going through a lot of the meat of the senior design process, like the design process itself. And what does that look like? It's problem statement, background research, objective constraints, initial design ideas, down selecting to some of the best design options, making a CAD model, and then proposing that idea as the design or the prototype that you want to make in the spring. And then in the spring, you're going to spend a lot of your time actually making a prototype, testing it, refining it, iterating it. That's the usual typical process. Not every project follows that particular path. There are some that are more complex or less complex where you might have different timeline, but I'd say that's a good like rough timeline for the 2 different courses. There are certain deliverables that are required for every single group. In the fall, that would be a written proposal, which comes at the end of the term, and it details some of these things that I just laid out, right? Problem statements, objective constraints, concepts, and what you propose to actually iterate or prototype on in the spring. You also have an oral presentation at the end of the fall, usually occurs Friday of finals week, where you stand in front of a committee of at least 3 mechanical engineering faculty and talk about your design, what you plan to do, why you've picked what you've picked, defend your design with calculations, things like that. All right. Then in the spring term, you will have a couple of things due as well. The first is a short abstract, which is due to the university because they make a university-wide senior design booklet. And so you give 150 words to them describing your process. They put it in a book. There's a big book that comes out at the end of the year describing all the processes. So that's going to be something you have to do. You'll have a final design report, which is again a written report. Most of them are usually between 50 and 100 pages of everything detailing your design, right? There will also be a poster presentation that you'll need to give at the end of the spring term. We have a nice exhibition here at the end of the spring where we have a bunch of teams showcasing their prototypes, standing beside posters that describe their prototypes. It's kind of a fun day. It's a cool day, right? So those are things that every single group is going to need to do. Aside from that, your individual project advisor may have more requirements, meaning What do they have for weekly assignments, let's say, or weekly update meetings? Like, what do they want you to do? Do they want you to put a couple slides together of what you did this week to progress your design forward, right? And that might be something that your advisor does. Maybe they have written homework assignments or something that you need to do, right? So your advisor might have individual assignments as well. And aside from the advisor assignments, we also have weekly seminars in the fall term. The weekly seminars start out informational. And what I mean by that is that's like we have the librarian come in and talk about how to do research studies and how to determine the current state of the art of a particular design, right? We have an IP lawyer come in and talk about intellectual property and what your rights are as a student to what you develop during senior design. Later in the term, we start to turn towards more experiential seminars. We have a president of a company come in and talk about what it's like to start a design engineering firm, which is kind of cool. Maybe if you have an entrepreneurial spirit, that might be interesting to you. We have someone that comes in that's been an engineer for 20 years. She shares her experience working for GE, for small design firms, for large design firms. She's had a couple jobs. She's got a really interesting story. So those are the kind of things that you'll hear in our seminars. We do those at Dirk's Hall. It's kind of nice. Just come, chill, listen to some people talk. It's kind of a cool thing. Grades. How are grades assigned? It's up to the discretion of the individual project advisor, and most advisors have some sort of methodology that they use for assigning grades, but I'll admit that the grades in the senior design sequence are kind of a little bit nebulous. There's some emphasis that goes into the reports that you write, some emphasis that goes into the presentations that you do, some emphasis that goes into how you're producing material on the weekly basis during your weekly meetings with your advisors, those sorts of things. Usually, when you start sitting down with your advisor at the beginning of the terms, they'll sort of lay out their expectations and have some sort of system for how they might assign grades. So if I were you as a student, I might be asking like, how are grades assigned for this class for your each individual advisor? Okay. Your grades can also be reduced if you miss seminars, right? So come to the seminar. Rah. Prototypes. We have money in the Emmy department for prototypes. It's really nice. We usually have about $20,000 every single year to dish out to groups for prototypes. That means about $1,000 every group, because not every group does a prototype, okay? We have a system for allotting that money. It is a grant proposal system. I put together a call for proposals. I send it out early in the year and say, groups, if you want prototype money, put together a one-pager for me that describes what you want the money for, a brief bill of materials, send it to me. I'll look it over, make sure everything's kosher, everything's good. We'll give you your money and tell you how to order your parts, and then away you go with your prototyping. It is so nice. I did not have this money when I was an undergrad. When I went through my time, I had to pay for parts of the prototype that I made when I was an undergrad out of my own pocket. So this is kind of a nice thing that we have in the mechanical engineering department. All right. Last thing here, before we open it up for questions, is student project ideas. So you can submit a project idea if you have one. We have several student projects that are running right now that people proposed last year that we let go through. Okay. If you want to submit a project idea, here's what I require from you. You need to have one or two paragraphs describing a problem that you see. Okay. This is important. It needs to be framed as a problem, meaning this problem exists. I don't want you to frame it as we're going to build an engine. That's not a problem. All right. You have to describe it as this engine that we're using for our super mileage vehicle team is bad for this reason, period. We propose to design a new engine. That would be a good, like sort of proposal, right? You're giving it in the framing of a problem. The design process is the process meant to address that problem, right? So you come up with design ideas during the design process. You don't want to propose a solution to the problem from the very beginning, okay? So make sure you frame it as a problem if this is something that's interesting to you. All right. If you have an idea, you need to find some person that's willing to serve as your advisor in ME faculty. So run this by them, ask them if this is a reasonable thing that they might be willing to advise. Once you have those two things, come talk to me. We'll put it in the list, probably. All right, so that's that. I'm asking for those project proposals to be done by Monday, March 24th. All right, so that's right after spring break. So if you have an idea, you probably want to get on it like sooner rather than later. Okay. That's it for the talk. I'm gonna open it up now for questions if you have them. You can either type them in the chat or if you want to raise your hand and ask a question, we can take some time here now for that. So that's the end of the talk. I'll hang around for questions. Reminder, we do have Dr. Mahinfla on the line who's going to take over and talk about graduate programs. So please don't leave the meeting quite yet. Okay? Any questions? Will the slide deck be shared? Asks Lucas. Yes, I will put the slide deck into a box folder and send out the link to the box folder um, by the end of the day. I have another meeting here right around 12:45 I got to get to, so probably by the end of the day. Let's maybe give about 30 more seconds for questions here. A question here from Stephen. We are able to collaborate with students in other majors, correct? Yes, we can do interdisciplinary projects provided we have a couple of things. One, you have other people in other departments, students that is, that are interested in doing the projects with you, and you kind of know who those people are. And two, the program directors of those other departments are willing and on board to do the interdisciplinary project. I need to talk with them because sometimes interdisciplinary projects require paperwork on the ME end and paperwork on the other department end. And we kind of have to come into an agreement about like what things are going to be required of each of the individual students in each of the individual departments that are going to satisfy the requirements for either ME or the other department. So it's a little bit difficult to do because of how much assessment happens in senior design, but I'm not saying it's out of the question, and we definitely have done it in the past. Chad asks, if a project does not have any associated patents, does MSOE reserve the right to own that tentative patent? As in, if we create something new, does the school own it? Undergraduate students going through 4 credit classes own their IP. So MSOE does not choose to pursue any IP created as part of an undergraduate course. There are policies about this. There's an MSOE website about IP, and we have policies in the policy library about that. So if you have something that's patentable from your class and you want to go about it, you are free to do that. MSOE will not pursue you or not pursue that IP. Other questions? You can look that policy up too, Chad, by the way. It's just a normal like website. Okay, if there are no more questions, then I'm actually going to turn it over to Dr. Mahinfla. I'm actually going to stop the recording here, and then we'll use this recording